The pistol was already cocked when Serafina Voss decided she would not beg. She stood in the rain-slicked courtyard of Scarlet Hall, her wrists bound before her with rope that had cut red lines into her skin, her dark hair plastered to her cheeks in soaking curtains, her traveling cloak ruined beyond salvage. Around her, 6 mounted soldiers waited with the particular patience of men who had done this before, who had dragged women from coaches in the dark and presented them to their masters like game flushed from the hedgerows. The torches above the great doors hissed and spat against the downpour. The house behind them rose 4 stories into the Georgian night, a monument of pale stone and dark windows, and in almost every window, not a single light. Except one. 3rd floor. Corner room. A candle, burning steady and unwavering, as though nothing so ordinary as a storm could disturb it. She fixed her eyes on that candle and breathed, in, out, the way her father had taught her in another life, in another country, when danger had worn a different face. Do not let them see the fear, Sarah. Fear is information. Never give a man information for free. The great doors opened. He did not hurry. That was the first thing she noticed about Cavendish Aldrich Storm, the Duke of Ravenmore, that he moved through the world as though it had been constructed at his precise specification and was merely running slightly behind schedule. He wore no coat despite the October cold, only a white linen shirt and dark breeches. His sleeves rolled to the elbows with the casual authority of a man interrupted from something that mattered far more than she did. His hair was black. His jaw was the kind that landscape painters gave to mountains. And his eyes, when they found her across the torchlit courtyard, were the precise gray of a January sky before a killing frost. He stopped 3 feet from her, looked at her with an expression so utterly devoid of warmth that she felt the cold of it more than the rain. "You are not," he said quietly, "what I was expecting." "I rarely am," Serafina said, "a circumstance I find continually useful." Something shifted in his face. Not softness, nothing so forgiving as that. More like a door, cracked open an inch, then shut immediately. "Bring her inside," he said, and turned back toward the house without another glance. She had not come to Scarlet Hall willingly. That was the truth she clung to through the next hours, through the rough handling of the soldiers, through the interrogation conducted in a cold stone antechamber by a man whose title she was not permitted to know, through the removal of her soaked outer garments by 2 silent maids who looked at her the way one looks at a problem not yet fully understood. She had not come willingly, and she had not come as what they believed her to be. What they believed her to be was a spy. What she actually was, that was considerably more complicated. Her name was Serafina Voss, but she had been born Serafina Vassilieva, daughter of a Russian diplomat and an English merchant's daughter. Raised between 2 worlds, until both of them had collapsed simultaneously in the winter of 1743. Her father had died in St. Petersburg under circumstances that the Tsar's court had sealed behind 7 locked doors. Her mother had died the following spring, quietly, of a grief that the English doctors called fever because they had no better word for a woman who simply decided one morning to stop living. At 23, Serafina had inherited nothing but her father's mind, her mother's stubbornness, and a small leather satchel of encoded correspondence that half the crowned heads of Europe would have paid extraordinary sums to possess. She had been trying to reach London. She had been 3 miles from the coaching road to the capital when Ravenmore's soldiers had intercepted her. And now she was here, in a drawing room that smelled of beeswax and cedar, wrapped in a borrowed wool blanket before a fire that someone had thought to build, staring at the Duke of Ravenmore's back as he stood at the window and looked out at the storm-destroyed night. He had not spoken since the antechamber. The interrogation had been conducted by his man, a narrow-faced fellow named Cresswell with ink-stained fingers and the manner of a solicitor who had taken a wrong turn somewhere in his 20s. Ravenmore had stood in the corner throughout, arms folded, listening with that terrible, focused stillness. She had told them her name. She had denied being a spy. She had declined to explain the satchel. At that last refusal, Cavendish had finally spoken. "Leave us," he had said to Cresswell. And here they were. "You understand," he said now, still facing the window, "the position you are in." "I understand the position you believe I am in," Serafina replied. Her voice was steady. She was inordinately proud of this. "There is a meaningful distinction." He turned then, and in the firelight, he looked less like a mountain and more like something carved from it, all severity and shadow, but with an odd quality of contained movement, as though he was always, on some deep level, ready. She had seen that quality before, in soldiers who had survived too many engagements, in men who had learned that peace was simply the space between catastrophes. A woman traveling alone, no papers of passage, a satchel containing correspondence in at least 3 languages, 2 of which appear to be in cipher. He moved to the chair across from hers and sat, did not lounge, sat with his spine perfectly straight and his hands loose on his knees, and studied her with those frost-gray eyes. The simplest explanation is the correct one. The simplest explanation, Serafina said, is frequently the laziest one. "I expected better of you, Your Grace." The silence that followed was extraordinary. She watched him process the fact that she had just insulted him, and she watched him decide, with visible deliberateness, not to respond to it in the obvious way. Another door, opening a fraction. Another door closed. "Why were you going to London?" he asked. "I have business there." "What business?" "Private business." "Nothing," said the Duke of Ravenmore, with a quality of patience that was somehow more threatening than rage, "is private in a time of war." The word landed between them like a stone into still water. War. It was 1745, and the young pretender had landed in Scotland 3 months past, and the country had cracked along fault lines that had been forming for half a century. And men like the Duke of Ravenmore, men with titles and estates and regiments at their disposal, stood at the center of the fracture, choosing sides, making calculations, keeping secrets that could reshape the map of England. She understood then, with a cold clarity that had nothing to do with the storm, what she had stumbled into, what Scarlet Hall actually was, and why a man of his standing kept no lights in his windows at night. "You are not simply a duke," she said slowly. He said nothing. "You work for the crown." A pause. "Or against it." The firelight moved across his face. "That," he said, "is the most dangerous sentence you have yet spoken. I have a talent for those. A talent that has thus far failed to keep you out of a great deal of trouble. Your Grace." She leaned forward, not flirtatiously, but with the intensity of someone making a calculation. "I am not your enemy. The letters in that satchel are not a threat to you, but I cannot explain them to you tonight in this room, with your Mr. Cresswell listening at the door. Yes, he is. I heard him shift his weight twice. And I cannot explain them to you without first understanding exactly who you are and what you intend to do with what I tell you." The silence stretched. The fire popped. Rain hammered the glass. "Cresswell," he called, without raising his voice. The door opened. The narrow-faced man stood in the frame, wearing the expression of a person who had not, in fact, been listening, and was committed to this position absolutely. "Have Mrs. Petch prepare the East Wing guest room," Cavendish said. "Miss Voss will be staying." "For how long, Your Grace?" He looked at her. She looked at him. "Until I decide," he said. She had been inside Scarlet Hall for 4 days before she saw him smile. It was not, she would reflect later, an entirely comfortable thing to witness. It appeared briefly in the library, when she made a remark about Voltaire that he had not expected from a woman who presented herself as a merchant's daughter. It lasted perhaps 2 seconds. It transformed his face in a way that was vaguely alarming, not because it made him look less dangerous, but because it made him look, for a fleeting instant, entirely human. Then it was gone, and the frost returned, and they went back to their careful, circling, exquisitely polite war. The war had rules. She would come to the library each morning because she had nowhere else to go, and because the East Wing guest room, while comfortable, had a lock on the outside that she was not supposed to know about and could not in any case defeat. He would already be there, at the great oak desk by the north window, working through correspondence with the focused efficiency of a man for whom time was a finite resource being perpetually mismanaged by everyone around him. She would take a book. She would sit by the fire. And for precisely 1 hour each morning, the Duke of Ravenmore would ask her questions, and she would answer approximately 1/3 of them, and the other 2/3 she would deflect with a precision that she could see both irritated and interested him. "Your father was Dmitri Vassiliev," he said on the 3rd day. Not a question. She looked up from her book, kept her face entirely still. "My father was Edmund Voss, a wool merchant of Bristol." "Your father," he said, with the same quality of patient immovability, "was Dmitri Vassiliev, second attaché to the Russian Imperial Mission in London from 1720 to 1731, and subsequently private counsel to 3 men whose names I will not speak in an open room. He died in St. Petersburg in the winter of 1743, under circumstances that the Russian court has declined to discuss with anyone, including his own daughter." The book in her hands felt suddenly very heavy. "How do you know that?" she said. "Because I was in St. Petersburg in the winter of 1743. He set down his pen. "I was there on crown business, the nature of which I will not disclose. I did not know your father personally, but I knew of him, and I knew the men who wanted him dead." The fire crackled. Outside, the October wind worried at the window frames. "Then you know," she said carefully, "what is in the satchel." "I know what might be in the satchel," he said. "I have been afraid to confirm it." She set down her book. For the first time since her arrival, she looked at him not as an obstacle or a captor or an unknown variable, but simply as a man sitting across a room from her. A man who was tired, she realized. Not physically tired. Tired in the way of people who have carried something very heavy for a very long time and have developed such expertise in the carrying that no one around them can see the weight anymore. "Your Grace," she said, "what is your name? Your Christian name?" He looked startled. It was the most unguarded she had seen him. "I beg your pardon? I know your title. I know your duchy. I know apparently rather more about your activities than you intended me to. But I do not know what your mother called you, and I find I cannot have this conversation. The real one. The one we have both been circling for 3 days. With a title. A long pause. The wind. The fire. Cavendish, he said. Though I haven't been called that since I was 12. Cavendish. She tried it. It suited him. Heavy, elegant, slightly archaic, belonging to an older and more uncompromising world. The letters in the satchel contain the names of 12 English lords who have pledged financial and military support to the Jacobite rising. They also contain the terms of a proposed alliance between those lords and a faction within the Russian court, who believe that a Stuart restoration would destabilize England sufficiently to stop. He said it very quietly, but with such force that she stopped. He rose from the desk, moved to the window, stood with his back to her, both hands flat on the frame. "Do you have any idea," he said, "what will happen if that information reaches the wrong hands?" "Yes, which is why I was bringing it to the right ones." "And you believed those were in London?" "I believed, I hoped. They were connected to a man my father trusted. A man he wrote to me about, in the last letter I received from him before he died. He used a name I didn't recognize. I've been trying to find the man behind it for 2 years." Slowly, Cavendish turned from the window. "What name?" he said. She met his eyes. "Storm," she said. He called him simply Storm. The silence that followed was so complete that she could hear the individual hisses of the beeswax candles and the distant cry of a bird outside, and the precise sound of Cavendish Aldrich Storm, Duke of Ravenmore. Understanding that the woman his soldiers had dragged out of a rainstorm had been looking for him for 2 years, and had no idea she had found him. He did not tell her. Not that day. That night, in the East Wing guest room, Serafina sat on the edge of the bed in the dark and thought about her father's letter, which she had long since committed to memory and then burned because her father had taught her that paper was a liability. "There is a man called Storm, Sarah. If the worst should come, and I fear now that it will, find him. He is not easy to find, and he is not easy to trust, and he will not thank you for arriving on his doorstep. But he is the only man in England I would stake your life on. He will know what to do with what I leave you." She pressed her fingers to her lips, thought about frost-gray eyes and a 2-second smile and a man who stood at windows in the dark. He is not easy to trust. The understatement, Papa, she thought, of the entire century. On the 5th day, everything changed. She was in the garden. She had earned the garden through 4 days of careful negotiation and Cavendish's reluctant assessment that she could not climb the estate wall in a skirt. When she heard the horses, not 1 or 2, many. The thunder of multiple riders coming fast up the approach road, and then the sounds of the household disturbed. Shouts, the clatter of the stable yard, Mrs. Petch's voice giving orders in the efficient manner of a woman accustomed to emergencies. She was moving toward the house before she had consciously decided to, which told her something about what 4 days inside Scarlet Hall had done to her sense of its geography and its rhythms. She came through the garden door into the lower corridor and nearly collided with Cresswell, who grabbed her arm. "His Grace's instructions," he said, breathing quickly, "are that you are to go immediately to the library and stay there." "What is happening?" "Government men. Soldiers from the—" He caught himself, looked at her with his ink-stained face full of a calculation she couldn't quite read. "Please, Miss Voss. The library. Now." She went, but she did not stay. The library adjoined a small anteroom, and the anteroom had a connecting door to the east corridor, and the east corridor had a gallery above the great hall, and from the gallery she could see, without being seen, everything that happened in the room below. There were 5 soldiers in red coats, and with them, in the dress coat and powdered wig of a government official, was a man she recognized. Her stomach turned to ice. His name was Sir Gerald Thorne, and he was a senior secretary to the Duke of Cumberland, and he had been in St. Petersburg in the winter of 1743, and she was absolutely certain, with a conviction that had taken her 18 months and the deaths of 2 people she had trusted to arrive at, that he was one of the 12 names in the cipher. She watched from the gallery as Cavendish received him in the great hall below. Watched the handshake, the bow, watched Cavendish's face, and here was the thing that caught in her chest, like a hook. She watched his face, and she saw nothing. No recognition, no alarm, no flicker of the knowledge she had given him yesterday. He was perfect. He was stone. He was a man receiving a government official on a routine matter of no particular interest. He was lying to Thorne's face and doing it magnificently, and she did not know if that meant he was protecting her or simply playing both sides of a game whose rules she didn't fully understand. "We are searching for a woman," Thorne was saying in the hall below. His voice carried easily. He had the kind of voice designed for rooms larger than the ones he usually occupied. "A foreign national, Russian connections. She was seen on the Harrogate Road 4 days past." "I'm afraid I cannot help you," Cavendish said. "We've had no visitors to Scarlet Hall in some weeks. The weather has been inhospitable." "Indeed." Thorne looked around the hall with the manner of a man performing casual interest while conducting a search. "A pity. The woman in question is in possession of certain documents, stolen documents, it should be said, of considerable sensitivity to the crown." "Stolen from whom?" A pause. "From a Russian courier. She killed him." Serafina's hand found the gallery railing. She had not killed anyone. The courier had been dead when she found him, shot in the road with the satchel beside him, and she had taken the satchel because her father's letter had told her to find the cipher, and she had found it by terrible accident, and she had run because there was nothing else to do. But Thorne didn't know that. Or rather, Thorne knew exactly what had happened and was saying something different, which was infinitely worse. "A woman who kills couriers," Cavendish said, with admirable conversational mildness. "She sounds formidable." "She is dangerous," Thorne said, "and she is not what she appears." He reached into his coat and produced a folded paper, held it out. "If she should come to your attention." Cavendish took the paper. "Of course. I will inform you immediately." She pressed herself back from the railing. Her heart was a fist, knocking against her ribs with frantic urgency. She needed to move. She needed to reach the library before Cresswell came to check on her, before anyone noted her absence from where she was supposed to be. She needed to think, and she could not think here, suspended above a room where her fate was being discussed with such terrible cordiality. She was 3 steps from the library door when Cavendish's hand closed around her wrist. She had not heard him come up the stairs. She had not heard anything, which told her something about how he moved, about the particular skills of a man who did crown work in foreign courts and survived it. "Inside," he said, very quietly. She went inside. He followed. He closed the door. In the library firelight, his face was unreadable, but his hand, where it had briefly held her wrist, had been careful, not cruel, not possessive, careful. "How much did you hear?" he asked. "Enough. You told him I wasn't here. Yes. Why? He was quiet for a moment. He moved to the desk but didn't sit, stood with one hand on its surface, looking at some middle distance between them. Thorn, he said, is not a government man. She felt the confirmation of it like a blow, even though she had been certain. Certainty and proof are different things, and proof, when it comes, always lands harder than you expect. He's one of the 12, she said. He is the architect of the 12. Cavendish looked at her then. He has been working for 2 years to build a coalition capable of sustaining a Stuart restoration. Not out of loyalty to the Jacobite cause. Thorn doesn't have loyalties. He has investments. He believes a restored Stuart monarchy, improperly managed, could be made to serve certain financial interests that the current government is disinclined to protect. He paused. Your father discovered this, and Thorn had your father killed. The fire, the candles, the ordinary cruelty of a room that continued to be warm and lit while she processed the fact that the man responsible for her father's death had just been standing 40 feet below her. And the courier? She said. Also Thorn's work. He needed to ensure the cipher never reached London. He's had men watching every road south for months. He crossed to her, stopped 2 feet away. Miss Voss, Seraphina. Her name in his mouth, for the first time, and without the title, was something she felt rather than heard. I need you to understand what you have walked into. Thorn doesn't know you're here yet, but he will. He has informants in every posting house between here and York, and someone will have seen my soldiers on the Harrogate Road. We have perhaps a week before he comes back with more men and a warrant. Then I'll leave tonight, she said. You cannot travel alone. I have managed adequately thus far. You have managed, he said, to travel approximately 60 miles in the wrong direction and end up in the custody of a man you've been looking for 2 years without recognizing him. The words hit her. She stared at him. His gray eyes did not waver. You, she said. Just the one word. Then again, you. And then, because she was her father's daughter and her mother's, and because she did not perform weakness, you are Storm. I have used that name, yes, in certain contexts. My father. She stopped. Started again. My father told me to find you. He said you would know what to do. Your father saved my life in the winter of 1742, Cavendish said, in circumstances I am not at liberty to describe. I owed him a debt I could not repay because he died before I could settle it. Something moved behind his eyes. Not quite grief, but its shadow, the outline of a grief that had been present for a long time and had learned to keep itself very quiet. I intend to repay it through you. The silence between them was different now. She could feel it, the shift in its texture, the way it had changed from something guarded and adversarial into something else, something that had weight and heat and the particular quality of mutual recognition between two people who have, without quite meaning to, begun to matter to each other. I don't want to be a debt settled, she said. No, he agreed. I don't imagine you do. A week passed, then another. Thorn did not return, which should have been reassuring and was instead deeply alarming, because Thorn was not a man who gave up. He was a man who regrouped, who recalculated, who came back with better information and more men and a strategy that closed off every exit simultaneously. Cavendish knew this. He did not say so, but she could see it in the way he moved through the house. That readiness, always present, sharpened now to something finer and more urgent. He had doubled the men at the gate. He had sent Cresswell to London with a letter she was not shown. He had taken the cipher from her satchel. With her permission, granted carefully. After an hour's negotiation, that had ended with both of them standing over the library table looking at the encoded pages with the particular intimacy of two people bent over a shared secret. "This one," she said, pointing to a line of figures. "This is the key symbol. My father developed it himself. It's based on a system he adapted from Byzantine merchant codes." Byzantine. He leaned closer. She was very aware of the proximity, of his shoulder 3 inches from hers, the warmth of him in the cold library air, the fact that he smelled of wood smoke and something that was neither cologne nor soap but simply him, a quality of cold outdoor air that persisted indoors. Where did he learn Byzantine merchant codes? He was, at heart, a scholar who happened to find himself in the middle of history. She looked up. He was closer than she had realized, looking not at the page now, but at her, with that focused quality that always made her feel simultaneously examined and somehow inexplicably seen. She stepped back. "He would have liked you, I think. He admired obstinate men." "I am not obstinate," he said. "I am thorough." "The obstinate always are," she said, and had the satisfaction of watching that brief, incandescent smile appear and disappear before he could prevent it. She thought about that smile far too often in the days that followed. The house had developed a rhythm around them, a rhythm that the servants navigated with the careful neutrality of people who observe things and keep their own counsel. Mrs. Petch brought Seraphina's meals to the dining room now, rather than the east wing, because Cavendish had decided, without, as far as she could tell, consciously deciding anything, that they would share the meals. They did not discuss this. It simply happened, the way other things between them simply happened. The morning library sessions that had extended from 1 hour to 3, the evening habit of sitting by the drawing-room fire while he worked through correspondence and she read, the walk in the garden that had become, through some unspoken agreement, a daily fixture. He was not a comfortable man to walk with. He was silent in the way of people who have strong internal weather, and she was never sure whether the silence was companionable or charged, whether he was thinking about the cipher or about Thorne, or about something else entirely. Sometimes he would ask her about her father. He asked carefully, tucked in the way of someone who wants the information, but does not want to cause pain, and she answered in the same way. And the conversation moved between them like something they were both tending, careful not to break it. "He made good choices?" Cavendish asked one afternoon. They were on the south path, the kitchen gardens bare and frost-edged on either side, the pale late autumn sky enormous above the estate walls. "He made brave choices," Seraphina said. "Whether they were good is harder to say. He chose my mother over his career, a marriage the Russian court considered extremely inadvisable for a man of his position. He chose his conscience over his safety, which is what brought Thorne's attention on him. He chose to trust me with the cipher rather than destroy it." She paused. "I don't know if any of those choices were good. I know they were true to him." Cavendish was quiet for several steps. "There is an argument," he said slowly, "that truthful choices and good choices are the same thing. And another argument," she said, "that truth is a luxury that duty cannot always afford." He glanced at her. "You sound as though you have considered this at length." "I grew up between 2 empires," she said, "both of them full of men making very practical choices. I have had cause to think about what that costs." They walked. The frost crunched under their boots. A rook called from somewhere beyond the wall, once, then fell silent. "I have a sister," he said. It was so unexpected that she looked at him sharply. He was looking straight ahead, his profile against the pale sky as severe and clean-lined as ever. But something in the set of his shoulders was different. An opening, slight and provisional, but there. "She married 4 years ago. A baron's second son. No title, modest income. A man who makes her laugh at breakfast." He paused. "My mother was appalled. I was not." "That is unexpectedly—" She searched for the word. "Tender of you, your grace." "Cavendish." A beat. "Cavendish. My mother believes I should marry Lady Westerford's eldest daughter," he said. "It has been strongly implied. By my mother, by Lady Westerford, by several of my peers who have apparently been following the matter with great interest, that this is both my duty and my destiny as Duke of Ravenmore." "And what do you believe?" The long pause. The rook called again. The frost. "I believe," he said very carefully, as though choosing each word from a limited supply, "that I have been so thoroughly occupied with the business of crown work and duty and consequence, that I have not paused, until recently, to consider what I actually want." The word recently landed between them with perfect precision. She felt it. She knew, without looking at him, that he knew she felt it. They both maintained, through some mutual act of discipline, the forward-facing, frost-crunching, perfectly proper fiction of two people simply walking. "And what do you want?" she asked. The silence that followed lasted the length of the path, back to the garden door, through it and into the house, all the way to the point where their paths diverged. Her toward the east wing, him toward the library. And in that silence lived everything that could not yet be said. "Good evening, ya Miss Voss," he said, at the corridor junction, with the same grave formality he had used on the first night. "Good evening, your grace," she replied, with the same. She went to her room and sat on the edge of her bed and pressed both palms flat to her thighs and breathed in, out, deliberately, the way her father had taught her, and told herself, with the firmness of a woman who has survived considerable difficulties and intends to survive more, that this was nothing she could afford, that she was a woman with a satchel full of political dynamite, hunted by a man who had murdered her father, housed in the country estate of a nobleman whose world she did not belong to, and whose life she would complicate irreparably. That this was nothing she could afford. She believed it for approximately 45 minutes, until she heard, through the thin wall, the sound of him pacing, back and forth across the study floor, for a long time, in the dark. She pressed her palm to the wall. She said nothing. She did not have to. She found the letter by accident. It was 12 days into her stay. She had gone to the library earlier than usual, 3 in the morning, sleepless, wrapped in a borrowed shawl, and she had taken a book from the second shelf, and folded between its pages was a single sheet of paper, covered on both sides in his handwriting. Dense, precise. The letters formed with the same quality of controlled force as everything else about him. It was addressed to no one. It began in the middle of a thought, as though he had started writing without planning to and could not find a stopping point. She should not have read it. She read it. And I find I cannot approach this with the rational clarity the situation requires. I have tried. I have sat at this desk every morning for 11 days and applied myself to the cipher, to Thorn, to the London letter, to every practical and pressing matter that demands my attention, and every morning, without my permission, I find myself watching her instead. She reads with her chin in her hand and her foot tucked under her on the chair, which is not proper, and which Mrs. Petch has apparently decided not to remark upon. She argues about Voltaire. She knows Byzantine merchant codes. She flinched once when I raised my voice to Cresswell, and then she straightened her spine so quickly I might have imagined it, except that I did not imagine it. I notice everything she does, which is itself a problem I do not know how to address. My father would have said, "There are women you encounter and women you are altered by." He said this about my mother in one of his occasional human moments, before the estate and the duchy and the weight of Ravenmoor closed back around him. I was 14. I did not understand him. I understand him now. I am not a man who permits himself. I have not been a man who permits himself. This is not a matter of, she is going to leave. When the cipher reaches London and Thorn is exposed and the 12 are brought to account, she will leave. She has a life that has nothing to do with Scarlet Hall, and she has not come here by choice, and I have absolutely no right to. I have no right. But I cannot stop watching her read. She put the letter back, exactly as she found it. She sat in the library for an hour in the dark, not reading, just staring at the fire with the letter burning somewhere behind her sternum. Then she went back to her room and she wrote nothing, because she was her father's daughter, and her father had told her that paper was a liability. But she thought things. Many things. Precise, dangerous, unwelcome things that she could not unthink. Standing at the window of the east wing with the November stars hard and cold overhead, and Scarlet Hall breathing its slow, steady breath around her. It was Cresswell who came to her the next morning, not during the library hour. At dawn, before the household had properly woken, with his ink-stained face carrying an expression she had not seen on him before. Fear, unconcealed and urgent. "A rider came last night," he said, without preamble. "From the York posting house. John Thorne has been making inquiries, specific ones, about His Grace's household. He knows you are here." The cold that moved through her had nothing to do with temperature. "How long do we have?" she said. "He is traveling with 12 soldiers and a warrant signed by Cumberland himself." Cresswell paused. 2 days, perhaps 3. "And His Grace is in the study. He has been since the rider came." A hesitation. "Miss Voss, there are things about His Grace's situation, about the particular difficulty of his position as Duke, that perhaps you should—" "Cresswell," Cavendish's voice from the corridor. Very quiet. Cresswell stepped back. Cavendish filled the doorway of the East Wing room, still in his shirt, as she had first seen him, his hair uncombed, an expression on his face that was difficult to name because she had not seen him wear it before. It took her a moment to identify it. He looked afraid, not of Thorne, not of the warrant, of something else entirely, something internal and considerable, that he was managing with the same careful, controlled force with which he managed everything. "Leave us," he said to Cresswell. Then, to her, "Forgive the hour. Forgive the hour," she repeated, as Cresswell withdrew. "Cavendish, Thorne is 2 days away with a warrant." "Yes." He came into the room, stood with his back to the door, both hands behind him, and looked at her with those frost-gray eyes that were not, this morning, quite so frost-like. "I have written to London. The cipher, properly decoded, is already in the hands of a man I trust at Whitehall. Thorn's name and the names of the 12 are known to people who have the authority to act on them. He paused. The warrant will be voided. The soldiers will be recalled. Thorn will be, the word they'll use in the official accounts is retired from service, which is the kind of language governments use for men they cannot publicly try. She felt the breath leave her. It's over. Effectively, it's a yes. Then I can go to London. Yes. He did not move. You can. The morning light was coming through the east wing window, pale and thin and very clear, and it fell across the floor between them like something physical, like a distance being measured. You read the letter, he said. She had known this was coming. She had been bracing for it since she put it back between the pages of the book. Yes, she said. I'm sorry. It was not. I did not mean to. Did you read all of it? Yes. A long pause. And? She looked at him. He was looking at her with an expression that she would have called, on any other face, raw, stripped of the careful architecture of distance and control, just briefly, just now, in this particular morning light. And, she said carefully, I think you should know that I also cannot stop noticing things, and that I also find I cannot approach this with rational clarity, which is deeply inconvenient. She held his gaze, and that I am aware I will leave when this is finished, and that you have no right, and that I do not belong in your world, Cavendish. I know what I am. A merchant's daughter with a Russian name and a dead father, and a satchel that has caused more trouble than it is worth. Stop, he said. I am stating the practical. Stop. He crossed the room. Not quickly. Everything he did was deliberate. Everything chosen. But he crossed it, and he stopped in front of her. Close enough that she had to look up at him. Close enough that she could see the precise gray of his eyes and the shadows beneath them from a sleepless night. And he lifted one hand and tucked a strand of hair back from her face with a care that was so at odds with his general quality of immovable force that she felt it like a small blow to the chest. You are the most obstinate person I have ever encountered, he said, very quietly. And I include in that assessment every foreign diplomat, every government minister, and every enemy I have faced on behalf of the crown. And I find that The door crashed open. Not Cresswell. Two men she had never seen, in riding clothes, their faces masked, their pistols already drawn. Thorn had not waited 2 days. The next 20 minutes were the longest of her life. Cavendish moved fast. Faster than she would have believed possible from a man standing still a heartbeat before, and put himself between her and the door before the second man had fully entered. She heard shouts from elsewhere in the house, the sound of running feet, a crash from the ground floor that she could not interpret. Ravenmore, said one of the masked men. Sir Gerald's compliments. Step away from the woman. Sir Gerald, Cavendish said, with an almost superhuman quality of conversational calm, is going to find the next several weeks extremely unpleasant. Step away. No. It was the simplest word she had ever heard. She stood behind him and looked at the rigid line of his spine and understood, with complete conviction, like that he meant it. That he would stand in this doorway in his shirt sleeves with no weapon and no particular advantage and decline to move, and that this was entirely in keeping with everything she had come to understand about him in 13 days. She also understood that 2 pistols against nothing was not an argument that moral clarity could win. She moved, not toward the door, around him laterally, drawing the attention of both men for a half-second, while she pulled the small knife from the sheath at her forearm, where it had been residing since the first night, because she was Dmitri Vasilyev's daughter, and she did not travel unequipped, and she had the knife across the closer man's pistol arm before he had processed what she was doing. The pistol dropped. She caught it. The other man swung his weapon toward her. Cavendish took it from him with a speed and efficiency that suggested very extensive training in close circumstances, and reversed it, and the man found himself at the wrong end of his own pistol in the span of a breath. They looked at each other across the two disarmed men. "Byzantine merchant codes and a concealed blade," Cavendish said, breathing only slightly harder than usual. "My father," she said, "was a thorough man." The rest unfolded with the controlled, organized quality of a house that had rehearsed for contingencies. Cavendish's household guard, which was considerably more substantial than she had realized, had detained 4 additional men in the courtyard. Cresswell appeared with rope and the manner of a man who had been waiting for exactly this. The 2 men from the East Wing were locked in the cellar with their associates, and Cavendish spent an hour with them that she was not a part of and did not ask about. When he emerged, he found her in the library. She had made tea because there was nothing else sensible to do, and because the alternative was to sit with her hands in her lap and contemplate the fact that she had just held a pistol on a man, which was not an experience she had been anticipating when she woke up. He sat down. She poured him tea. The domesticity of it was so incongruous that she heard him make a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was the nearest thing to it she had yet encountered from him. "Well?" she said. "Well," he agreed. "Thorne himself?" "Not among them. He sent proxies." He wrapped his hands around the teacup. Large hands. She had noticed this in the library, over the cipher, with ink stains that matched Cresswell's, which told its own story about where the actual analytical work of Crown intelligence was conducted. He will know they have failed by morning, and by morning, the men at Whitehall will know what I know, and Thorne's warrant will be worth approximately the paper it's printed on. So it is truly over. For him. Yes. He looked at her. For you, it is perhaps more complicated. She wrapped her own hands around her own cup. Outside, the November afternoon was failing into early dark, and the candles were being lit around the library by a housemaid who moved with the particular invisibility of servants in great houses, there and not there, necessary and unseen. "I have nowhere particular to go," Serafina said. "I have the remains of my father's estate in Bristol, which is very small and very mortgaged, and which a solicitor has been managing in my absence. I have a reasonable understanding of 6 languages and an exceptional understanding of codes. I have no family, no connections, no position." She paused. "And I have spent the last 2 years being hunted, which has made me perhaps not the most conventional of perspective." She stopped herself. Cavendish set down his cup, very deliberately. "Perspective what?" The candlelight was very still. The string of words she had arrested sat between them, unfinished and obvious. "I was going to say person," she said. "You were not," he said. She looked at the fire, looked at her tea, looked finally at him, because she was her mother's daughter too. Her mother who had chosen love over propriety, who had crossed from the merchant class into the diplomat's world and refused to apologize for it, and who had been wrong in almost nothing except the question of who should be allowed to break her heart. "I do not know what my father intended," she said, "when he sent me to find you. Whether he thought, whether he hoped." She steadied herself. "I know that I came here as your prisoner, and I am leaving as something else that I do not have an adequate word for, and that this house and everything in it has become She gestured, helplessly, at the room, at the fire and the books and the window with the single candle, the one she had fixed her eyes on in the courtyard the first night, and had, she realized now, never entirely looked away from since. "I am not good at this," she said. "I am very good at codes and several languages and concealed knives, and I am not good at this." "Neither am I," he said. Evidently. He stood. She stood. The fire crackled between them. "Stay," he said. Just the one word. Not a command. Everything in his voice was careful, provisional, offered rather than demanded. "Not as a prisoner. Not because of the cipher or thorn or any debt owed to your father. Stay because—" He stopped, tried again. "Serafina, I have been building walls since I was 12 years old, and I have become exceptionally good at it. And you have been inside this house for 13 days, and I cannot find you anywhere in the blueprint." She looked at him. The candles, the fire, the winter dark outside. "That," she said softly, "what is possibly the most romantic thing I have ever been told." "It was not intended to be romantic," he said. "It was intended to be precise." "I know," she said. "That's why it was romantic." And she crossed the space between them, and his hands came up to hold her face with the same devastating carefulness with which he had tucked back her hair that morning. Careful, deliberate, chosen, as everything with him was chosen. And he pressed his forehead to hers, and neither of them moved for a long moment. Just breathed. Just that. The simple, extraordinary fact of it. Then she turned her face up. Then the library door opened. Cresswell stood in the doorway. His ink-stained face had gone the color of chalk. In his hand was a letter, the seal already broken, and she could see from across the room that his hand was not steady. Chateau Cavendish released her, stepped back, looked at Cresswell with an expression that cycled through irritation, alarm, and settled on something that frightened her because she recognized it. The quality of a man bracing for information he cannot prevent from being true. "The Whitehall letter," Cresswell said. "Your Grace," the reply came. "The man you wrote to, Alderman Foster." "Yes." "He is dead, Your Grace. He was found 3 days ago." Cresswell swallowed. "And the letter you sent him, the details of the cipher, Thorne's name, the 12, it never reached anyone else. The messenger was intercepted." Serafina felt the room shift under her feet. "Intercepted by whom?" Cavendish said, very quietly. Cresswell held out the letter. Cavendish took it, read it. His face went through the same controlled, an invisible process that she had watched so many times. The thing he did when information arrived that required processing before it could be safely displayed. But this time, at the end of it, something showed through. Not fear. Not the braced quality of a man absorbing bad news. Something worse. Confusion. "Cavendish," she said. "What does it say?" He looked up from the letter. His gray eyes found hers across the library, across the fire and the candles and the ruined almost moment of the last few minutes. "The cipher," he said. "Serafina, the cipher your father gave you. He told you it contained the names of 12 lords who pledged to support the Jacobite rising." "Yes." "And you believed him?" "He was my father." "Yes." He put the letter down on the desk. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to hear it without... I need you to trust me when I tell you that I do not believe what this letter implies, but I need to ask it." The fire, the dark window, the single candle. "Ask," she said. "Did your father tell you specifically what was in the cipher? Did you read it yourself, before you brought it to me? Did you verify? I cannot read the cipher, she said slowly. It's in his personal code. I never had the key. He said you would have the key. Cavendish was very still. I do not have the key, he said. I have never had the key. The silence that followed was of a completely different quality from every silence that had preceded it. This one had teeth. Then who does? She whispered. He picked up the letter again, read from it, not meeting her eyes. The decoding was completed by a separate analyst, brought in by Cresswell's contact at the Foreign Office. The content of the cipher does not match your father's description. He stopped. His jaw was tight. The cipher does not contain the names of 12 Jacobite lords. It contains something else. What? He looked at her then, and in his gray eyes she saw it. The bracing quality, yes, but also something underneath it. Something complicated and pained and directed entirely at her, with an honesty she had not seen on any face in 2 years of being hunted and lied to. It contains your name, he said, and mine, and a set of instructions that your father wrote 18 months before he died. She could not speak. He knew, Cavendish said very quietly. He knew Thorne was going to kill him. He knew you would need protection. He knew, Serafina. He had access to intelligence I didn't know he possessed, about Scarlet Hall, about my work, about my... He stopped. He engineered this, all of it. The cipher was never about Thorne. The cipher was about you, and about me. And he used the one thing he knew Thorne would absolutely come after to ensure that his daughter would end up exactly here. The letter in his hand, the fire behind him, the house breathing around them. What do the instructions say? She said. Her voice came from very far away. He looked at the letter for a long moment. Then he looked at her. He says, Cavendish said, and she heard something in his voice she had never heard there before. Something unguarded and wholly undefended, like a wall that has finally run out of stones. That he trusts me with everything he ever loved, and that he hopes I will be worthy of it. The candle on the desk guttered. Serafina pressed one hand flat to her sternum. Thought of her father in a St. Petersburg study, dying, writing a code that was not a code but a map. Pointing his daughter at the only safe harbor he could find, and trusting, with the absolute faith of a desperate and brilliant man, that the harbor would hold her. He never told me, she said. He didn't tell me what I was carrying. No, Cavendish said. He only told you to find me. Because if he'd told me the truth, I would never have. I would have refused. I don't want to be a... Serafina. I don't want to be a mission. I don't want to be a thing he arranged. Serafina. He crossed the room again. Not with caution this time. With certainty. Look at me. She looked at him. Whatever your father intended, he said. Whatever he wrote. Whatever he arranged. You are not a mission. You are not a debt. His hands came up, and again that devastating carefulness, holding her face as though it were something he was afraid to break and more afraid to let go of. Do you believe me? She looked into his gray eyes, which were not frost now, not January sky, but something older and steadier and utterly, undefendably sincere. I want to, she said. Yes, I believe you. Something in his face changed. Not the smile, something deeper than the smile, something that had been behind it all along. Good, he said very quietly, because there is something else in the letter. Something your father wrote that I have not told you yet. She felt her heartbeat in her throat. What? He held her gaze. "So the cipher key," he said. "Your father sent it separately, to Thorn." The words detonated in the silence of the library with the force of something irrevocable. "To Thorn," she said. "Yes." "Then Thorn can read the cipher. He knows everything that's in it." "Yes." "Your name, my name, your crown work, the—" "Yes." She stepped back. He let her go. She looked at the window, where the November dark was complete now, and the single candle burned its reflection in the black glass. "He didn't just come for me," she said. "He came for you." "Yes." "And he is still out there." Cavendish moved to the window, stood as she had first seen him, his back to her, both hands flat on the frame, looking out into the dark. Outside, somewhere beyond the estate wall, in the night that stretched unbroken between Scarlet Hall and whatever came next, Sir Gerald Thorne had a key and a warrant and 12 allies with armies and a name that should have stayed secret. "There is one more thing in the letter," Cavendish said. She waited. "Your father's instructions name a third party, someone who has been in possession of the remaining documentation, the full intelligence file on Thorne's network, for the past 2 years. Someone he placed it with in the event of his death." He paused. "Someone who is, according to this letter, currently in London under Thorne's protection, and has been feeding Thorne information about your movements from the beginning." The cold moved through her again, precise and total. "Who?" she said. He turned from the window and faced her fully, and in his gray eyes was the weight of everything the letter contained. All of it, every layer, every carefully constructed deception her father had built and someone else had corrupted. "There is one person who knew everything your father knew. One person with access to both the Russian court and the English intelligence network. One person who could have created the Edmund Voss identity and filled it with someone capable of playing it. Your father had a partner," Cavendish said, his voice dropping to something barely above the hiss of the candles. "For 11 years. A man he called his closest friend. A man who disappeared 6 months before your father died, and whom no one has seen or heard from since. And his name," he said carefully, "is Edmund Voss." She heard her own breath, her own heartbeat. Edmund Voss. Her father's cover identity. Her mother's name. The name on the papers she had been given after her mother's death. It was the papers that established her as a merchant's daughter from Bristol. The name of a man who did not exist. Except apparently, he did. "My father created him," she said slowly. Her mind was moving fast, making connections she didn't want to make, following the cipher logic of it. The multiple layers, the false bottoms, the keys inside keys. He created Edmund Voss as a cover identity. But if someone else is using that name, if there is a real person operating under that name, with access to the documentation, then your father told someone else, Cavendish said. Someone he trusted before he trusted me. Someone who has been watching you for 2 years and guiding you indirectly toward Scarlet Hall. He paused. And who has been talking to Thorne the entire time? She put her hand on the library desk, needed the solidity of it. Then I was never running from Thorne, she said. I was being herded. Yes. Toward you. Yes. And whoever is using my father's cover identity knew that if they got you and me in the same place at the same time, with Thorne closing in. She stopped. The logic of it opened before her like a trap door. It's a trap, she said. Not for me, not for Thorne. For you. She looked up. Someone wants you exposed. Someone wants Thorne to have everything he needs to bring down a Crown intelligence operation. And my father..." Her voice cracked. She steadied it. "My father's cipher was weaponized against him, against us, against everything he was trying to protect." Cavendish was very still. "There is a name your father used only once," he said, "in the letter. A name he crossed out and then rewrote, as though he could not decide whether to leave it. The name of the man he believed had turned against him. The man who built the Edmund Voss identity from the inside and then became it." He looked at her across the library, across the fire and the dark and everything that had passed between them in 13 days, with an expression that held, beneath its severity, something that was almost an apology. He called him the architect. Outside in the November dark, a horse screamed, and then another. And then the sound of the gate being broken open, and many hooves on frozen ground, and the distant crack of a pistol, and Cresswell's voice shouting something from the lower floor, and the single candle in the library window guttered again, and went out. And in the total dark, Cavendish's hand found hers, not with the carefulness of a man afraid to break something, but with the absolute certainty of a man who has decided finally what he is holding on to. "Stay close to me," he said. "I intend to," she said. And somewhere in London, in a house she had never visited, a man who wore her father's name looked at a letter sealed with black wax and read the single sentence written inside it, and smiled. The cipher, at last, had come home. If that ending stopped your heart, leave a comment. Tell us, do you trust the Duke? Subscribe. The Architect isn't finished. Neither are we.